Before we start to make use of existing code from other users of SugarCube, I recommend a few preparation steps. If you intend to write a long interactive fiction that might span over 600 passages for story content alone, somewhere down the line you will want to use an external compiler that's independent of the Twine editor. This video will not cover that aspect just yet because it is not straightforward for a beginner, but I will slowly help you get ready for the day when you need to use an external compiler for your SugarCube project. The Twine editor is very helpful when the branching story project is relatively short, because it has a flowchart-like interface and is self-contained, but it has limitations, error-prone features, and sometimes crash without warning, which could corrupt your project files. For these reasons, I recommend you have all the code and story content in other document formats, then copy and paste them into the editor if you still need to rely on it for the time being. Twi3 is a notation used by some external compilers to delineate between passages that are written in one document. Even if we are not using such a compiler now, we can still write our content and code using this notation. So in a text document, type 2 colons, then a space, then the name of a passage. Tags of a passage are optional, but if there is any tag, add another space, then put tags inside a single square bracket separated by one space. On the next line is the start of the passage content. Do that for all of the passages in the project. You can have as many passages as you want in one document, or separate them by chapters or types. This content division may be necessary when your story becomes very lengthy, or if you work with other writers who might only need to edit some of the passages without changing any other. The document to store the raw content can be any text-based format. Commonly, a text file is saved with the .txt extension, but for a reason that will only be clear later, I will save this text file in .tw extension. However, if you rather work with a word processor for your raw content, as long as you turn off the auto-replace feature for smart quotes and other non-ASCII symbols in the word processor, it should be fine when you later copy and paste the content into the Twine editor. To save a backup copy, or just to export the game to share with others, go to the lower left corner menu of the Twine editor and select the last option, Publish to File. This will compile all the passages into a single HTML file that can be run in a browser. You want to do this often enough during project development, because if the Twine editor crashes and corrupts the project file, you may at least recover some progress by importing the HTML file back into the editor. SugarCube is written in the JavaScript programming language, and you will interact with JavaScript code sometimes to achieve certain effects. But for the most part, you just need to know where to paste what code. Go to the lower left corner menu and select the first option, Edit Story JavaScript. Here you can use JavaScript directly to add functionalities, whereas in passages you will need a script macro to inject JavaScript among SugarCube syntax and regular content. For now, we will only edit some configuration variables that will affect the project as a whole. If you are familiar with JavaScript and will use it in regular passages, note that the JavaScript in this section will be processed first. SugarCube can keep track of variable changes from passage to passage. By default, it will save 100 consecutive moments of all variables, global or temporary, as the story moves from one passage to another. It's like System Restore in Windows, Time Machine in Mac, as it takes a snapshot of all variables in the game and saving them so that readers may choose to rewind to a previous state of the game. TroyScript has no undo, which can be simulated by setting the max states variable to 1. If you want to have 1 undo, then set it to 2, and so on. If your game contains many variables, I recommend a low value here. If you find yourself needing to add the NOBR tag to every single passage, it might be easier to set the NOBR configuration variable to true to remove all implicit blank lines from all passages. The default value of this variable is false, so if you prefer to control exactly where you use the / syntax, the NOBR macro, or the NOBR tag, you don't have to add this line of code here. The default number of save slots in SugarCube is 8. You can change this number with the config.saves.slots variable. To use the autosave feature of SugarCube, You can set the config.saves.autosave variable to an array of tag names that will tell the engine to autosave when it navigates to a passage with any of the tags in that list. For now, I will use the example code from the documentation. You can rename them for your project. Next, remember to add that tag to the passage heading in your code, or if you are still using the Twine editor, add that tag to the passage. The entire story JavaScript section in the Twine editor can be represented in the TUI3 notation by giving the passage the script tag. But be aware that this will tell the engine to interpret the content of this passage as pure JavaScript and not a mixture of SugarCube syntax and/or JavaScript. This way of denoting JavaScript in your project is fine, and sometimes you might prefer to do this to keep related JavaScript in the same file so you can find them quicker. However, a cleaner way is to save the JavaScript code as a .js file on its own. In that case, they don't need the TUI3 notation. While you are using the Twine editor, you may wish to store all of the JavaScript in a single .js file. Then you can just do a select all, copy, then paste them into the story JavaScript section in the Twine editor.